Given hip-hop's African-American origins and wider associations with blackness, it is unsurprising that hip-hop studies in the UK and Europe has focused on the Black Atlantic to frame its subject. And yet, several minority ethnic youth cultures employ the language of hip-hop to express their diasporic hybrid identities in the UK. Griff Rollefson notes the relative absence of writings about South Asian rappers and pop artists, for example, and his work on MIA in particular helps redress this imbalance. But even more absent in the literature on British rappers are those with Arab heritage. Many of these rappers are based in London, and this shared multicultural locality often provides a self-identified quote-unquote urban community which go beyond simple denotations of ethnicity or heritage. Just a few stats there for you as well. But Arab British rappers also offer a unique perspective on cultural identity, prejudice, and global and social inequalities. They're quick to acknowledge the role of Britain in carving and exploiting the Middle East under the British Empire and point to what they see as current UK-supported injustices, including Israeli settler colonialism, the Second Gulf War, Syrian airstrikes, and racial profiling in a post-9/11, post-7/7 United Kingdom. This paper focuses on Iraqi-British rapper Loki, but also includes other important voices such as the Palestinian-British First Lady of Arabic hip-hop, Shadia Mansour. I discussed the ways in which the Middle Eastern diasporic identity provides a context for wider political critiques, with lyrics frequently discussing war, terrorism, and post-imperial power relations in the Middle East. Given Britain's role in creating or carving Palestine, Iran, Iraq, and other Middle Eastern and North African nation-states after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Arab British and other rappers of Middle Eastern heritage also engaged forcefully with the UK's colonial and neo-colonial politics, fusing with multicultural London youth communities in striking ways. The main themes within Arab British rap I engage with are Palestine, terrorism, and identity politics or belonging, and I will only have time to touch on these briefly. I do very little of this today, more of that and the most of this. But it only scratches the surface of an important and diverse demographic of UK rappers, but attempt to add to the existing literature on Middle East and North African rappers by addressing British rappers with this heritage. Rappers of the Arab diaspora in multicultural London and elsewhere form a family of resemblances based on a sense of ethnic marginalization, as well as by being a product of the lived consequences of empire. Time does not allow today for an adequate history of Israeli-Palestinian relations. But for our purposes, you guys want to go to other things today. The rappers I investigate are strongly against the Balfour Declaration of 1917, a British declaration to build a Jewish state on Palestinian land. Palestine was controlled by British mandate from 1920 up until the creation of Israel in 1948, leading to the displacement of 700,000 Palestinians, an event known as the Nakba or catastrophe. Palestinian rap groups began to emerge in the late 1990s, and their political activity intensified during the Second Intifada, which was first sparked in 2000 when Ariel Sharon forcibly entered Temple Mount, which led to Palestinian protests, and some of these protests culminated in a way in what they call Black October, where 13 Palestinians were killed and 200 wounded, which led to further uprising. Now, if anyone studied hip-hop in the Middle East, you will know the wealth of literature about the group DAM from Lod, but of course there are other groups as well from Palestine, shown there, and here's just again a short list of some other pro-Palestinian as well as some with Palestinian heritage in these different countries, including the United States. Scholars have placed Palestinian hip-hop within longer traditions of Arab dissenting music, and artists have pointed to US figures such as Tupac and Public Enemy as original inspiration. For those who rap for Palestine, it not only provides a voice for the voiceless, which is a prominent trope in discussing hip-hop, and the title of a song by Loki featuring Immortal Technique, but also helps to act as memory and as history, especially in light of active suppression of memory by the Israeli government, who included a parliamentary bill to ban any commemorations of the Nakba, for example. Or, shock, the BBC, which struck out the words "Free Palestine" from a freestyle rap by Mike Righteous on One Extra in 2011. They took out the words. It's caused a controversy. So moving on to the first case study for today. Shadi Mansour was born in London in 1985 to Christian Palestinian parents, where she spent her summers in Haifa and Nazareth. Extremely active in London's Free Palestine protest movements, she began to MC in 2003 and is now known as the First Lady of Arabic Hip-Hop. Many of her lyrics are against the Israeli occupation in the West Bank and the 2008 Gaza offensive. She raps in Arabic and considers Arabic hip-hop to be an uprising in music. One of her most well-known music videos was the product of her finding a blue and white Israeli kufiya with Stars of David made by an American company. The kufiya is Syrian in origin and began being used as a political symbol in the 1930s Arab revolt against the British Mandate and Zionists in Palestine. It has since become a resistance symbol and nationalist emblem, as an Arab nationalist emblem, but has been appropriated by clothing stores such as Topshop, American Apparel, Oasis, and Urban Outfitters, being labeled as activist chic or even jihadi chic. And here's some examples of the Israeli version, which is the purpose of Mansour's song. In response to this appropriation, Mansour wrote "The Kufiya is Arab" and featured American rapper M1 of Dead Prez, who accompanied the Viva Palestina convoy to provide aid to Gaza. The links with hip-hop and resistance, and the kufiya as a sign of resistance, are over in the music video. And Mansour expresses her anger over the appropriation of this scarf. It is in Arabic, and I don't have subtitles, but I'll return to this slide. This is her opening words. Now, I wasn't able to get the internet to work, so I've got a worse quality VLC clip, which may or may not work. But let's have a go, as we say in Britain. Slow. Oh, sorry, wrong video. That's what I'm going to show in a little bit. So that one works at least. Open with, why not, Windows Media Player. Okay. I'll play the first minute or so of this video. Apologies, it's a lower quality than I thought. What would you like us to serve you? Arab blood or tears from our eyes? I think that's how they expect us to receive them. The kufiya is Arabic, but will stay Arab. They imitating us what we wear from this land. What else do you want? Mansour's lyrics point to her anger at the Israeli appropriation of an object associated with Palestinian solidarity. Her presence is striking for a number of reasons. One, by being, again, the First Lady of Arabic hip-hop in a male-dominated rap culture, and another being her choice to rap in Arabic rather than English. For those who do not understand Arabic, which me included, it's still a powerful delivery, as a number of YouTube comments attest. Her percussive style fuses well with Arabic language and gets to the heart of the anger she feels even when you don't understand the semantic meaning of the lyrics. For her, the language of hip-hop becomes shorthand for a type of resistant music in the mold of earlier US political rap groups like Public Enemy. And this is the last bit of her final verse here. Raised between fear and evil, between two areas, between the grudging and the poor, I've seen life from both sides. Having seen life from both sides seems to allude to her London upbringing while she was able to visit her family in Palestine in the summers. She was able to see what was going on firsthand. Like the Kufia, Mansour considers her origins as Palestinian, symbolized by the scarf she wears, which she notes is symbolic of her identity. And this idea of her seeing these things firsthand and now living in Palestine is perhaps in contrast to the next rapper I'm going to talk about, Loki, who has not seen the things that he's rapping about firsthand, which I'll explain now. Rapper Loki is one of the most outspoken political voices in British rap. His mother is a middle-class jewelry designer from a politically active family that had left Iraq in the 1970s, and his white father from Dover was active in the Socialist Workers' Party. He has rapped about a number of issues, especially wars in Palestine and his mother's homeland of Iraq. He attended the now famous open mic sessions at Deal Real Records in London and received notoriety for his Key to the Game mixtapes in the early 2000s. He returned to the industry in 2008 with the album Dear Listener, and in 2011 with Soundtrack to the Struggle, which is the album cover there, note the kufia around his neck. He has been an outspoken opponent of the Iraq War as part of the Stop the War Coalition and is a member of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. These are some of the songs reflecting these thematic interests. He has spoken out against the poor government response to the Grenfell Tower fire and the US and UK governments bowing to corporate interests. Tracks like Terrorists deal with the racial profiling of Arabs as terrorists and point to the British and US governments as proliferating the most terrorism compared to smaller homegrown acts such as the 7/7 bombers and the IRA. I mean, he doesn't like that either, but it's a question of scale, right? The main point for him is that a concept of terrorist is flexible depending on your vantage point. As echoed in verse 1 when Loki raps, I guess it's all just dependent on who your nemesis is. And if people have heard DAM and their song, Who's the Terrorist, it's kind of echoing those sentiments. And again, the title of today's paper about who the terrorist is from Loki, as you might suspect. Loki himself says that he sees hip-hop as a form of standing up and saying I'm here and demand to be recognized. This may have been especially pertinent for someone, as we will see, that never felt he fit fully into English or Arab notions of identity growing up. So this last track I want to discuss today fuses the well-academically trodden concepts such as identity and belonging, especially for anthropologists, belonging, this is where you sort of sigh and roll your eyes, alongside a critique of the Second Gulf War. Despite the large amount of academic attention to these concepts, however, such themes are nevertheless important as a topical point for the rappers who feel outside the dominant culture. For them, the preoccupation comes from personal experience, not finding one's place within Britain. Cradle of Civilization is a personal response on behalf of those being bombed in his mother's country, literally and figuratively his motherland, yet feels removed since he has never been there himself. He discusses the freedom which he has in Britain, but grieves for those still in Iraq. There's a few lines here. From the cradle of civilization, which is in his blood and in his heart, but he's never visited. He raps, quote, I never picked up a grenade in my garden. I never saw people I loved die starving. I never lost a friend to violence that was random, unquote. He also critiques the liberation, quote unquote, of Iraq, questioning 1 million dead people doesn't equal liberation, and the role Britain and US had in this. The chorus, sung in Arabic, means, oh, how beautiful is freedom, something his mom would say to him. The female voice of Maid Khalil musically demonstrates the doubleness that Loki feels, and in the video, she's in one place and he's in another. Despite being born in London, he raps, quote, still I feel like an immigrant, Englishman amongst Arabs and an Arab amongst Englishmen. Perhaps demonstrating a third space which isn't quite the sum of its parts, but adds to the sense of ambivalence and placelessness. He ends the track with a line repeated for emphasis, in my sleep, in my dreams, motherland, I can still feel you calling me. And in thinking, I'll show you the clip in a second, and in thinking about the fact that I'm on this really interesting panel on gender, I started thinking about the gendering of empire, not least the sort of gendering of certain genres of music. And in thinking about the sort of colonial thinking of colonies as children, it's interesting that he sort of flips the script and thinks about the sort of former colony, not that it really was, but the former colony as mother rather than child. And so I think there might be some mileage there that I want to spend some more time working out. But for now, I will play after a sort of spoken intro, I'll play about the first minute of this, which is his first verse, some of which you've already heard me sort of quote, but this will give you an idea of the song and what he's talking about.
Where it's all free. This is for Baghdad, the place of my mother's birth, the dream of civilization for what it's worth. The land I've never seen, culture I've never known. Iraq is in my heart, my blood, my flesh and bones. The air I've never breathed, fragrance I've never smelled, pride I've never had, the nationality that I've never felt. So that was black heart, the Americans even more so. They made me grow like I was missing part of my torso. But I never picked up a grenade in my garden. I never saw people I loved die starving. I never saw my family die through many years of sanctions, while the ruler's family lived in palaces and mansions. I never had a family member kidnapped for a ransom. I never lost a friend to violence that was random. Horrors, occupation, torture, intimidation. A million dead people doesn't equal liberation. Sunni, Shia, Kurdish or Christian, pain is still pain.
Sorry, put that off. So Loki is able to reflect on his dual position as he raps in Arabic. Here, my mother's from Baghdad, my father's from Dover. Then switches to English, saying, and that's the combination I carry on my shoulders. This powerful code switching, is that the sound?
It's something to do with one of the speakers, I think.
If I'll try turning off the volume. Nope, that didn't do anything. We're all good at ignoring strange sound. How about that?
Yeah.
So, got my, the mic is off.
Let's just leave it.
Yeah. I didn't fool you guys, I'm a loud American. Okay. Loki is able to reflect on his dual position, as I said from this quote. This powerful code switching is the sound of the post-colonial condition. This displacement brought about by capitalist power inequalities, greed, and exploitation that continues to rage on under neocolonialism. It is also an intensely personal song, and one that gets to the heart of belonging or not belonging in the UK. His mixed race status, something which I think still needs more academic attention, contributes in part to this sense of not belonging, in addition to being cut off from his mother's heritage. The bilingualism serves a number of purposes in this context. The code switching shows both virtuosic versatility and an insider language that many listeners may not understand. For the English-speaking mainstream, it may give them a sense of what it's like to feel outside the culture, performing the otherness Loki often feels. In addition to the survivor's guilt tied up with his political critique, there may be a sense of the Freudian uncanny, which can be translated from the German as unhomely or unhousedness. It is unfamiliar yet familiar, not quite home yet comes back to haunt the subject. Right, in my sleep, in my dreams. Colonialism itself, as Homi Bhabha wrote, lies back at the origins of Western modernity and is therefore an aspect of its childhood. The bombing of the Middle East by Western powers could be seen as a neo-colonial return of the repressed fact of colonialism. As Kristeva wrote, echoing Fanon, foreignness is an uncanny trait that serves to disrupt our own inner sense of being so that we can realize that we are also foreigners to ourselves. It is this realization that can help us to enable us to live amongst others. And to cite Huddart, quote, the uncanny, in other words, opens a space for us to reconsider how we have come to be who we are, unquote. I would be hesitant to theorize that everyone's experience of growing up mixed race or black and minority ethnic in Britain is the same, nor would I generalize the experience as wholly positive or negative. Other intersectional considerations, such as class and gender, will also be a factor of these complex negotiations of identity. We can talk about that more if you want to. What I think we can see, however, is that mixed race Britons, as well as second-generation immigrants, have a unique perspective with which to discuss belonging. It allows many to see life from both sides. To quote Mansour's lyrics, even when for someone like Loki, he does not feel fully part of either side. The diversity of responses goes to show that a simple third space Bobbian reading of hybridity just does not get to the variety of perspectives on British identity through rap. To conclude, In thinking about how to study Arab British musicians, I initially looked to ethnographic studies of popular music in MENA regions. In such studies, there exist critiques of the overuse of resistance and liberation in, for example, Morocco, North Africa, and Iran. Echoing Loudon Nushin, oversimplifications of pop music making can be a product of filtering MENA activity into a Western lens of understanding and risks ignoring the artist's perspective or subtleties of how things operate in that region. Rather than study non-Western rappers, however, my investigation of less explored Arab British rappers adds another level of complication. Like Western ethnographers, these artists are arguably commenting on the Middle East from a Western subject position and may use such overcritique terms such as resistance, while also having a unique perspective on the situation given their personal connections to the region. They have grown up both with the colonizer discourse of the UK mainstream and a heritage that makes more visible the perspective of the colonized. Their othered status ethnically may have contributed to the greater awareness of such counter-narratives while nevertheless growing up second-generation British. For all that is simplified through using tropes such as resistance, we need to acknowledge and respect that rappers themselves use them, and that simplifying arguments for the sake of narrative or getting messages across is quite common in all forms of popular music. Low-Key himself says of rap that, quote, you can use your voice as a form of resistance, as an intifada, an uprising against what is happening, unquote. Mansour echoes this with her sentiments on Arabic hip-hop, as do other politically minded rappers. They rap about a variety of topics beyond politics and resistance, and while the real context involves a complexity that artists cannot fully portray, does not take away from the power of these political messages. Cradle of Civilization shows, for example, an intensely personal account of not belonging coupled with a governmental critique. In this way, and unlike grime music or drill music, the rapper becomes an ethnographer of a situation that he or she may not be fully a part of. It may not be a coincidence that many of the rappers who tackle such political material have some sort of link to the history of those colonized by empire, forming a family of resemblances regardless of ethnic affinities, and again, particularly in multicultural London. Rappers that lyrically demonstrate a connection with the Middle East use their voice as a method of exploring their own personal identity and as an instrument of critique to point out injustices carried out in their nation and abroad. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, marvellous, rich source material here. I'm sure there are lots of questions. But I shall take my chair's privilege and ask the first one. I was really struck by Shadia's track, and in particular, the sound world seemed to me to be quite US based. I don't know if it even shares a bass line with a bit of Eminem or something. You know, I was there, but then on the other hand, the lyrics and the language are a site of resistance. Do you find in some of these artists they're playing with sample material or allusions in a way that speaks to your question of resistance?
The tracks that I've dealt with and the artists that I've dealt with, if they are using samples or materials from elsewhere to think about Franco's talk, they're quite hidden in my sort of stylistically, generically alluding, yes, absolutely. I mean, more than alluding, that's not the right word, but within the stylistic norms of the genre, that's there. But with that said, Low-Key's soundtrack to the struggle has about 4 skits on it. So that kind of trend that dips in and out of hip-hop of having skits on your album. And one of the skits is actually this thing that's been talked about lately about John McCain rebutting this woman who said Obama wasn't Arab. No, he's not an Arab, he's a decent man. You know? And so that's, so not sampling in the sort of musical tracks, but actually some really interesting kind of news footage style things, which very much goes back to Public Enemy and that style of hip hop. So that's where we hear that. But yeah, I want to think more about that, the sounds on that track, as well as Cradle of Civilization, because you obviously have that kind of descending piano figure, the guy sort of opening his heart out, which is not necessarily associated with, say, a style like grime, right? So there's a positioning going on there as well, musically, with the themes, I think.
Thank you so much. Other questions?
I was really interested in the way that the two rappers use different language in their work. And I guess that's a kind of a political choice, isn't it, to choose to rap in Arabic?
Yeah.
I just wondered does that mean they have like a different kind of audience?
Yes, that's a really good question. So, and Shadi Mansour actually nowadays raps entirely in Arabic. Like that is a political choice that is, and lives in Palestine, and this is her, and so for that it's related because it does assume a particular audience. Loki, on the other hand, I think he's still sort of uncompromising in many ways, but also sees the importance of getting his stuff out there and promoting his stuff maybe a bit more widely. Mansour does as well, but again, a question of scale. The interesting thing about that group, DAM, that I was talking about, is that early in their career, they rapped in Arabic and Hebrew. And there's an interesting quote from the leader of DAM that says, I work, when I rap the version in Arabic, because he would have two versions. When I rap in Arabic, it's to talk to the people about the problem, and then I talk in Arabic about sort of how to solve the problem. So that was a quite conscious thing. They stopped doing that and kept to Arabic as their career went on. But these things are conscious choices, and the bilingualism in hip hop, although I know someone in Germany working on the topic, is really understudied, from Turkish German to Spanish English in the US. It needs a lot more work, maybe an edited collection someday, we'll see. But it's definitely a political choice. And I want to sort of investigate those choices further somehow.
One more short question, please, ma'am? Is there a question?
I just wanted to, in your reference, you had Lee 2010. I wasn't sure who.
Yeah, Lee, that's a documentary. That's a documentary film called, it's got Resistance in the title. It's a 2010 documentary. If you Google it, with Shadi Mansour and Loki, they're both in the documentary.
Oh, right.
Something like Voices of Resistance, and it's a great documentary. They both go to New York together. They do radio shows, and they do very intimate but exciting pro-Palestinian shows in New York.
Cultures of Resistance.
Cultures of Resistance. Thank you, Steve. Absolutely, Cultures of Resistance. So. And there's a longer story also to be told about the amount of ethnographers that go to the Middle East and how tired they are of talking about resistance, to the point where they're rolling their eyes like, yes, our music is resistant and da 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 da. But nevertheless, I still think there's some mileage in those themes, especially for the Western ethnographer rapper person. But that's from a documentary film, so those are quotes from the film.
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.